Before we begin, if you're drawn to stories of brilliance, struggle, and the minds that shaped our digital civilization, make sure you subscribe to Beyond the Struggle. The story you're about to hear isn't just history, it's the blueprint of the world you live in. Let's start with a simple truth. Look around you, the screens, the systems, the software that define modern life, they all trace back to one man's vision. The digital framework of our world, from finance to communication, from data to daily life, was shaped, refined, and unleashed by one relentless mind, William Henry Gates III. But this isn't just a story about wealth. It's about foresight, the kind of mind that didn't just see the machine but the entire ecosystem it required. And it all began with a 13-year-old boy and a single school computer. At Lakeside School in Seattle, a young Bill Gates met destiny, not through sports or social charm but through obsession. The object of that obsession was a hulking teletype machine connected by wires to a distant mainframe. Computing time was precious, limited, and expensive. But Gates didn't see limits. He saw opportunity. He and his friends discovered flaws in the system, weaknesses they could exploit to gain unlimited access. They were caught. But instead of punishment, something unexpected happened. The company they had hacked, Computer Center Corporation, recognized their genius and hired them to find more flaws. What began as mischief became mastery. That moment became a metaphor for Gates's entire life. Break the system, master it, and then control it. Gates's intensity was forged at home. His father, a powerful attorney. His mother, a civic leader and corporate board member. The Gates household was a battlefield of intellect and competition. Success wasn't an option, it was the baseline. Every argument was a test of logic, every game a lesson in strategy. This was where the foundation of the future Microsoft founder was built, through discipline, debate, and drive. Then came Paul Allen, slightly older, equally brilliant, and deeply visionary. Allen could see where technology was heading. Gates knew how to make it happen. Together they spent countless nights writing code, debugging, learning through failure. Their first venture, Traf-O-Data, tried to create traffic monitoring systems. It failed. But in failure, Gates learned his most valuable lesson. Writing great code means nothing if you can't sell it. Then came Harvard. In 1973, Gates arrived at Harvard intending to study law, but law was never his true calling. His heart was buried in the computer lab. He devoured programming manuals, built software for fun, and treated classes as distractions. He wasn't studying professors, he was studying possibility. Then, in December 1974, everything changed. Paul Allen walked into Gates's dorm room holding a copy of Popular Electronics. On the cover, the Altair 8800. The first personal microcomputer kit. Most people saw a hobbyist toy. Bill Gates saw the future. He realized that the Altair, like every computer, was just an empty box without a language, software to make it come alive. The Altair needed BASIC. Gates decided he would give it that voice. There was just one problem. He didn't have a BASIC interpreter. But he told the manufacturer MITS that he did. It was a lie, a strategic bluff. MITS took the bait. They wanted a demo. And suddenly Gates and Allen had 8 weeks to build something that didn't yet exist. They locked themselves inside a Harvard lab, working day and night. No sleep, no distractions, only code. They didn't even have an Altair to test on. Every line of code was written in the dark, on faith and logic alone. When Allen finally flew to Albuquerque for the demonstration, he wrote the final loader code on the airplane. And when he ran it on the Altair for the first time, the room went silent. Then it worked. Perfectly. That moment changed everything. Altair BASIC became the first commercially successful software for personal computers. It proved that code, invisible, intangible, could have more value than the machines themselves. In 1975, Gates dropped out of Harvard. He and Allen moved to Albuquerque and founded a small company called Microsoft. Their mission, a computer on every desk and in every home. At the time it sounded absurd. But Gates wasn't dreaming, he was calculating. He had learned the rules of the digital age before anyone else. Control the software and you control the machine. That single truth, foresight, audacity, control, would become the core of everything he built. The teenage hacker had become the architect of the digital world. And this was only the beginning. The genius that sparked Microsoft was not born from sudden inspiration. It was the result of an intense, disciplined, and restless childhood. William Henry Gates III entered the world in Seattle, 1955. The Gates household was one of intellect, privilege, and pressure. His father, William Gates Sr., was a commanding attorney, a man who believed in reason, structure, and strength. His mother, Mary Maxwell Gates, was a force of nature in business and civic life. Their home was filled with conversation, competition, and expectation. Excellence wasn't praised, it was assumed. From an early age, Bill showed signs of brilliance. He read voraciously, devouring encyclopedias and biographies like puzzles waiting to be solved. But with that brilliance came defiance. He challenged teachers, questioned logic, and rebelled against rules that didn't make sense to him. His parents quickly realized this wasn't ordinary teenage stubbornness, it was the mind of someone who needed challenge to stay alive. In search of that challenge, they enrolled him in the Lakeside School, a private institution for the academically gifted. And it was there, in the late 1960s, that destiny arrived in the form of a machine, a teletype terminal connected to a General Electric mainframe. The school's investment in this computer, nearly $50,000 at the time, became the single most transformative purchase in the life of young Bill Gates. He was instantly captivated. The machine wasn't just a tool, it was a universe. He began spending every possible hour in the computer room, surrounded by a small circle of equally obsessed classmates, including a young man named Paul Allen. While others saw a novelty, Gates saw a frontier. Together they tore apart code, rewrote it, and rebuilt it from scratch. They weren't students, they were explorers mapping a digital wilderness no one else could see. But obsession has a price. The limited computing time frustrated them. So Gates and his friends found a way around it. They discovered loopholes, security flaws, that let them access the mainframe for free. They were caught. But instead of punishment came opportunity. The company that owned the system, Computer Center Corporation, recognized something extraordinary in the young hackers. Rather than expel them, CCC offered a deal: unlimited computer time in exchange for helping debug the system. It was an unspoken initiation into the world of professional software. For the first time, Bill Gates was paid not for obedience, but for intellect. He was 16. This arrangement was more than a second chance, it was a revelation. Gates learned that curiosity, when disciplined and applied, could have value. It was a moment that turned teenage rebellion into a career. Soon after, Gates and Allen turned their growing skills into their first business, Traf-O-Data. Using data collected from traffic counters around Seattle, they built software to analyze and present it for local governments. The product itself wasn't a runaway success, but the experience was priceless. They learned how messy real-world computing was. They discovered that great code wasn't enough, you had to build something people could actually use, sell, and trust. By the time Gates entered Harvard University in 1973, he was already far more experienced than most of his professors. Officially, he studied pre-law, a nod to family tradition, but his true devotion was to the glow of the computer lab. He lived in a world of problems and possibilities, often vanishing for hours, even days inside the code. Harvard was less a destination and more a launch pad. Then, in late 1974, everything changed. Paul Allen walked into Gates's dorm room with a copy of Popular Electronics. On the cover was the Altair 8800, the world's first personal microcomputer. A small blue box with blinking lights. To most, it was a curiosity. To Gates, it was revelation. He understood instantly, the Altair was useless without software. The hardware had no language, no voice. Someone had to build that bridge. That someone would be him. Without hesitation, and without a working program, Gates called the machine's manufacturer, MITS, and claimed that he and Allen had already created a version of BASIC that could run on the Altair. It was pure bluff. But it worked. MITS wanted a demonstration. For the next 8 weeks, Gates and Allen lived in a frenzy of code. Sleepless nights, endless debugging, and no access to the actual computer. They wrote the entire program blind, guided only by logic and instinct. When Allen finally flew to Albuquerque for the demonstration, he wrote the final loader code on the airplane. The moment of truth came when the paper tape was fed into the Altair. The lights flickered. The program ran. And it worked, flawlessly. That single success didn't just create a product. It birthed an empire. Altair Basic proved that software could be sold, licensed, and scaled. It was the invisible heartbeat of the coming revolution. In 1975, Bill Gates dropped out of Harvard. Not out of failure, but out of foresight. He saw that the real classroom was no longer in Cambridge, it was in the new, chaotic world of personal computing. He was 19. And though the world didn't yet know it, his restless curiosity had just rewritten the rules of technology, and begun the rise of Microsoft. The move to Albuquerque, New Mexico in 1975 wasn't glamorous. It wasn't about wealth or fame. It was about necessity. Albuquerque was where MITS, the manufacturer of the Altair 8800, was headquartered. And it was there that two young men, Bill Gates and Paul Allen, carried a bold dream and a new company with an awkward name, Microsoft. The hyphen would soon disappear. The name would not. Their mission was simple, audacious, and nearly absurd for the time: a computer on every desk and in every home. In 1975, that dream sounded like science fiction. Computers were still massive, humming beasts confined to universities and corporations. But Gates and Allen saw something others didn't. The future wasn't in the metal or the wires. The true power was in the software. Their first creation, Altair Basic, opened the door. It was the interpreter that made the Altair usable, transforming a box of blinking lights into something people could program. It was a ticket into the world of commercial software. But that world was uncharted and brutally competitive. The early market was small, filled with hobbyists who freely shared programs and code. Gates saw danger in that generosity. In 1976, he took a stand that would define his philosophy forever. He wrote the now legendary Open Letter to Hobbyists. In it, Gates railed against the copying and free distribution of Altair Basic. He called it theft, piracy. To him, this was not a moral argument, it was an economic one. Why, he asked, would great programmers write new software if their work was stolen? The letter was polarizing. Many saw him as greedy, others as visionary. But that letter established a new doctrine in the digital world. Software has value. Software is property. This belief would become the cornerstone of Microsoft's rise, and the foundation of a trillion-dollar industry. The Albuquerque years were chaos. Gates was relentless. He slept under his desk, skipped meals, and coded until dawn. His office light was rarely off. His mind ran like a machine, precise, tireless, and obsessive. He could memorize entire pages of code and debug them mentally, line by line. His expectations were brutal. He demanded the same perfection from everyone around him. It was here that the myth of Bill Gates, the relentless, combative perfectionist, began to take shape. But even as Microsoft grew, Gates knew hobbyists weren't enough. He needed scale, a partnership that would push his software into the mainstream. And in 1980, opportunity came knocking in the form of a corporate giant. IBM. The undisputed monarch of the computing world. Big Blue. IBM dominated mainframes but had missed the emerging personal computer wave. They wanted in, fast. They were building their own PC, but there was one critical missing piece: the operating system. When IBM came to Microsoft, it wasn't for an OS. They came for programming languages. But Gates, sharp, listening, calculating, saw the opening. When IBM asked if Microsoft could provide an operating system, Gates said yes. There was just one problem. Microsoft didn't have one. What followed is perhaps the most consequential bluff in business history. Gates turned to a small local company in Seattle called Seattle Computer Products. They had a simple, functional system called QDOS, short for Quick and Dirty Operating System. Microsoft quietly bought the rights for roughly $50,000. Gates's team then refined it, rewrote it, and branded it MS-DOS, Microsoft Disk Operating System. When IBM came back, Microsoft was ready. But Gates's true genius wasn't just in delivering the product. It was in how he structured the deal. IBM wanted to buy MS-DOS outright. Gates refused. He insisted on two conditions that would change the course of computing forever. First, Microsoft would earn a royalty for every copy of MS-DOS installed on IBM's machines. Second, Microsoft would retain the right to license the software to other manufacturers. IBM, confident in its hardware supremacy, agreed. They believed the PC itself, their brand, was the real product. They couldn't have been more wrong. When the IBM PC launched in 1981, it exploded in popularity. Every corporation, every home wanted one. But IBM's design was open. Other companies quickly built cheaper clones that worked the same way. There was just one problem. All those clones needed software to run. They all needed MS-DOS. And every single time a PC clone booted up, Microsoft got paid. Bill Gates had effectively placed a quiet tax on the personal computer revolution. He didn't need to own the machines. He owned the language that made them live. In a single stroke, Gates transformed Microsoft from a small startup into the invisible giant behind an entire industry. IBM had the hardware. Gates had the future. The foundation of the Microsoft empire was complete. And the man once dismissed as a teenage hacker had become the architect of the digital age. By the dawn of the 1980s, Microsoft's crown jewel, MS-DOS, had positioned the company as the silent architect behind the booming personal computer industry. But Bill Gates was not satisfied with being a toll collector on the road others built. He wanted to define the road itself. The black and white world of command lines had served its purpose, but the future, Gates knew, was visual, friendly, and human. The next revolution would come not from hardware, but from the interface, from how people interacted with machines. The answer was Windows. It was a daring leap. In 1985, Microsoft launched Windows 1.0, a product that many critics dismissed as clumsy and unnecessary. It ran atop MS-DOS, slow and limited. But Gates didn't care about perfection. He cared about direction. He knew that iteration, not invention, wins the long game. Every update brought refinement, every version moved closer to his vision. 5 relentless years later came the breakthrough, Windows 3.0. With improved graphics, compatibility, and speed, it wasn't just software, it was liberation. 4 million of new computer owners, Windows made the once intimidating PC finally approachable. The mouse replaced cryptic commands, and the visual era of computing had arrived. Then in 1995 the world stopped. Windows 95 wasn't just an operating system, it was a global event. Backed by a $300 million marketing campaign and the Rolling Stones' Start Me Up, it became a pop culture phenomenon. The start button became a universal symbol of possibility, and the PC, once a tool for hobbyists and offices, became a gateway to the digital future in every home. Microsoft didn't just sell software, it sold simplicity. And that simplicity changed everything. Behind the scenes, Gates drove his company with unrelenting precision. He wasn't a CEO in the traditional sense, he was the ultimate engineer. In product reviews, he could recall exact lines of code, challenging his teams with laser-sharp questions that cut through ego and excuses. To work for Gates meant living in a state of constant pressure and possibility. Those who could match his intensity rose quickly. Those who couldn't, fell away. But Windows was only half the strategy. The other half was lock-in. Gates understood that if Microsoft controlled not just the operating system but also the tools people used every day, no competitor could dislodge them. Thus came Microsoft Office, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, a trinity that defined modern productivity. The integration was seamless, the dominance total. By the late 1990s, Microsoft had achieved what no other tech company had even imagined: control of both the desktop and the workflow of the entire digital planet. At the height of his power, Bill Gates was worth over $100 billion, his software running on over 90% of the world's computers. But absolute power attracts absolute scrutiny. In 1998, the US government struck back. The Department of Justice accused Microsoft of monopolistic practices, of using its operating system dominance to crush competition, particularly Netscape, by bundling Internet Explorer directly into Windows. What followed was one of the most dramatic corporate trials in modern history. Gates, usually calm and analytical, appeared combative in depositions. The once celebrated genius was now portrayed as the face of corporate arrogance. The trial ended with Microsoft found in violation of antitrust laws. A proposed breakup of the company loomed over Redmond. Though Microsoft avoided that fate after years of appeals, the damage was done. The government had clipped the wings of the empire. For Gates, it was a reckoning. He had conquered the technological world, but now he faced the realization that his empire had grown too large, too fast, too powerful. The innovator who once fought to make computers accessible had become the monopolist others fought to escape. But in this crucible of controversy, a transformation began. Gates started to see beyond business, beyond code, beyond control. He began to ask a new question, one that would define the next chapter of his life. If software could change the world, could philanthropy save it? The empire had been built. Now came the redemption of the man who ruled it. While his achievements in technology, MS-DOS, Windows, and Microsoft Office, defined an era, Bill Gates' story did not end at the height of corporate power. The man who had once revolutionized personal computing made a decision that stunned the world: to step away from the company he built and devote his life to solving the world's hardest problems. In the year 2000, Gates officially resigned as CEO of Microsoft. For most, that might have been the end of the story, the moment to rest, to retreat, to enjoy a fortune few could even imagine. But for Gates, it was a pivot. He was no longer chasing market share. He was chasing measurable, global change. Alongside his wife, Melinda, he founded the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, a colossal organization built not on profit but on precision. Gates didn't just throw money at problems. He brought the same analytical rigor that had shaped Microsoft. He wanted data, results, and impact. His mission: to identify the root causes of global suffering and fix them. The foundation began with a sweeping ambition: to eradicate diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries. Polio, malaria, tuberculosis. Gates poured billions into vaccine research, distribution networks, and healthcare infrastructure across Africa and Asia. He applied software logic to human suffering, analyzing systems, finding bugs, and engineering solutions at scale. But it didn't stop there. Gates turned his attention to education reform, poverty alleviation, and agricultural innovation, believing that empowering communities with tools and knowledge could break generational cycles of hardship. In essence, he traded the operating system of computers for the operating system of human progress. This evolution revealed something deeper about the man himself. His true genius wasn't confined to code. It lay in his capacity to see systems, to understand complexity, and to harness intellect as a weapon for transformation. The same relentless drive that once conquered Silicon Valley was now mobilized to fight inequality, disease, and the invisible architectures that hold billions back. Today, the Gates Foundation stands as one of the most influential philanthropic institutions on Earth, reshaping healthcare, driving vaccine innovation, funding pandemic research, and pushing forward the frontiers of clean energy and climate action. Bill Gates's legacy is now twofold: the architect of the digital age and the engineer of global compassion. He built machines that changed how people work, and then built systems that changed how people live. But the story isn't over. In our next and final chapter, we'll explore the new frontier of Gates's mission, his fight against the climate crisis, his innovations in clean nuclear energy through TerraPower, and his global call to prepare humanity for the next pandemic. So, subscribe now, and join us as we uncover how one man's relentless pursuit of solutions continues to shape not just technology, but the very future of the planet itself.